Alrighty, so it looks like it's 10. We're gonna get started so we can get stay on schedule. My name is Caitlin and I work here at LSU AXA, and I'm introducing our first presenter for the day. This is Sean O'Neill, and he's going to be conducting a session called Certify Your Tutor Training Program Success with the Best. And so I'll let him take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Caitlin. I'm just looking to see who all is here. A couple of names I recognize. Hey, folks. Um, as you can see from the slide deck here, I am filling in for one of my colleagues, Cheryl, who is unfortunately out sick today with a really bad case of bronchitis. She had this idea that you might want to be able to hear the presentation, so she asked if I would fill in for her today. So let's just update that title slide with my name. There we go. I hope everybody enjoyed the introduction, the welcome session, and I'm glad you're here. We're going to start with why am I here? So we're going to try to answer these three big questions. So what is ITTPC? What are the 4 criteria for certification? And then what is the application process like to become a CRLA certified tutor training program? I am Sean O'Neill, as previously introduced. I work at UNC Greensboro. I'm the Assistant Director for Academic Excellence, and I've been involved with CRLA for almost close to 15 years now. And I look forward to talking with you a little bit about tutor training. So I want to give us a minute while everybody is getting settled and have you identify 2 or 3 questions that you are seeking to answer. So you can jot these down, you can just think them in your head, you can put them in the chat if you want, but just kind of what are some of the things that you're thinking about to ground yourself in this presentation and what you're hoping to get out of it. And I'll give you 1 minute to do that. All right, that's about 1 minute. Always feels much longer than it actually is. Okay, so a couple of big picture, just orienting you to my style of webinar presentation. You are going to get a link to download the slide deck. So if you're somebody that likes to have the slides, you'll be able to download your own copy at the end. I'll also reference some materials throughout the presentation today. All of that will be linked on the slide deck as well. So you'll have that opportunity to get access or copies of these materials and others. I also have the chat box up. So if you're somebody that likes to make comments or chat during the session, don't feel like you're going to interrupt me to do that. I can present and keep an eye on the chat at the same time. And I've also got Caitlin keeping an eye on the chat as well if there's anything pressing that comes up. Now, like I said, I'm here to talk about ITTPC, and that stands for the International Tutor Training Program Certification. And this is through the College Reading and Learning Association. And I'm going to do a short salesmanship, and then we'll get into actually the criteria. So why train our tutors? And this is actually what got me interested in CRLA in the first place. So back when I was a young graduate student working at a tutoring center, we spent a lot of time and energy and effort training our tutors. And so my master's thesis way back when was, what is the reason why tutors should be trained? So what does the research say? There's a lot of really great research out there about the effect or the benefit of training tutors. We actually have an entire 15-page bibliography in our standards document that talks about training tutors. These are just some of the highlights for me that were most influential in my decision to spend the time and the resources to to do adequate tutor training. So tutors who are trained in communication techniques tend to have students that are more successful in their classes. Tutors who taught structural interactions, so how to scaffold learning, produce more successful students. And then, of course, I've got to mention Rick Sheets and all of his amazing research. He found that tutors that were trained were more effective at responding to common issues in tutoring sessions. Now, in terms of what do we mean by successful students, a lot of the research is going to focus on things like their course grades or their scores on certain survey metrics, that kind of thing. There are some that focus on things like the student's sense of belonging, the student's sense of wellness. But a lot of these early studies focused on grades. So why train our tutors? I feel like I'm speaking to the choir, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Why seek certification? So one of the ways that CRLA helps you is through this certification process. You're basically building a pathway to develop your tutors into higher quality tutors. So kind of molding that clay into a great tutor for your program. It increases visibility and credibility for your program and your tutors. I know that there are some tutoring centers on my own campus that aren't CRLA certified. And we find that being able to say that we're a certified program really helps to elevate our program and what we're doing. It creates documentation so that in the future, you or whoever replaces you when you win the lottery can go, what are we doing and why are we doing it this way? For a lot of programs that have been run by the same person for 40 years, this is really, really important. We also help to set standards and guidelines for your program. So if you're trying to think like I was way back when I was new to the field, like why are we doing it this way? Can we do this different? How can we do this differently? By having some of those guidelines, you really have the ability to be creative. One of my favorite Oscar Wilde quotes is that an absence of boundaries is the enemy of art. And I think that that's true here as well. So by having some structure, you're able to think a lot more creatively than just giving a blank canvas and saying, make something work. The other thing that I really value is the regular feedback. That's one of the ways I got involved with CRLA is because I love giving feedback and I love getting feedback. And so through the certification process, you get regular feedback from experts in the field, looking at what you're doing and saying, this is really cool, or I love how you're doing it this way, or have you thought about doing it that way? And so if you're the only person at your institution that works in a tutoring space, this can be a really valuable source of feedback for you. And then the other thing that, we like to talk about is, CRLA ITTPC is just for higher ed programs. So we're using research about higher ed. We're using college level tutors, helping college level students. So what we are doing is really relevant to the work that we're doing in our centers. CRLA is also endorsed by CLADIA, which is the Council of Learning Assistants and Developmental Education Associations. They don't like it when you call them CLADIA, so nobody tell on me. I'm CLADEA. It's been around for over 30 years. You don't have to be a member of CRLA to have a certified program. So if you are really active in ICLCA or ACTP or one of those other organizations, you don't have to then also find membership money for CRLA. Of course, you can be a member and be a certified program, but you don't have to be. And then a lot of programs nowadays are using their CRLA certification as part of their accreditation application for other things. So as part of NAID or part of a program or even college accreditation process. So that's my salesmanship spiel about why do this. Any questions about why? Or did I miss anything that you yourself know? When you get your certificate, here's what you get. Forgive the samples. So you'll get a letter from the certifications director that outlines your certification details with specific comments from your reviewers. So we usually will tell you what we think are strengths of your program, some recommendations of things to think about for the future. And if we have any concerns or had any concerns during the review process, we'll also outline those there. Again, really great feedback. You'll get a template or a certificate you can display in your center that talks about how great your program is. You'll get a template to recognize the tutors who complete your program, and a draft press release that you can use to announce your certification to your campus community. So you don't have to also market certification. We'll give you that template. And then you also will be allowed to use the CRLA logo to basically say how awesome your program is. So a nice little packet of information that you get. I know a lot of programs will have their certificate framed in their center and on display. I know we do. All right. I also want to talk a little bit about fees. I am not a money guy. So if you want to know how much will it cost, please email CRLA and ask, or look at the website. This is just the fee structure starting from this past January. So one level at a time is $450. We do have 3 levels, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. And you can think about the levels as having to do with the depth of the training that you're, or the sequencing of the training that your tutors receive. So it's not that a level 3 certified program is better. It's just that they have more training. All right. So what does the process look like? So step 1, you design and implement your program. We have a publication that you can use to help. We call it the SOAS, so the Standards, Outcomes, and Assessments document. There's a link to it in the slide deck. When you download it, you'll see it there. It's 118 pages long. I say that because if you download it on your phone, it's a big file. But essentially, we go through every single possible topic that we think make good training programs. There's a bibliography, there's sample documentation, there's sample lesson plans, there's like guiding questions to ask if you're designing a program from scratch. So basically, we try to say, what guidance does someone need in order to develop a well-rounded tutor training program? We put it all in one place. So once you've designed your program, you implement it and collect that authentic documentation. We'll talk about that when we get to the application. We do want to see you actually run your program at least once before you submit. Roberta, one of my colleagues who's the certification director, she likes to say we certify programs, not plans for programs. So we want to see you run that program once and make sure that you're happy with it. Once you've done that, you complete an application. That application is going to ask you to include some samples. So you'll show us what your training sessions typically look like. You'll show us how you're documenting your training hours. You'll give us examples of how you're collecting and aggregating experience, that kind of thing. And then you pay for your application. And then once your application is submitted and paid for, you can expect about a 4 to 6 month wait to get your program review back. During that time, you may get emails from the reviewers working on your application, asking you questions or guiding you through maybe a particular part of your materials that were a little unclear. Once your review is completed, then you get that packet of information, the certificate, the letter, and all of that thing. And that will give you a renewal date. On your renewal date, you just come back and fill out a renewal application, and basically you start the process over again. We do have 2, well, let me just get to the next slide. The next slide explains this a little bit more clearly. What do we mean by renewal? So we do have 3 levels, and then we have 2 different applications. So the first application is just for programs that are new. So you can think about new program applications as you are not certified at all, and you're seeking it for the first time, or you are adding something new to a current certificate. So let's say you have a level 1 program, you want to add level 2, you're adding a new element to your program, so you will do an application for new certification. Or let's say your program is certified, you have a program that's at your center or at your college that also wants to co-train, and you want to add them to your certificate. Awesome, you do a new application because you are adding something new to your program. So it's the easiest way to think about it. The renewal application is, the number of levels, number of programs, all of that is staying the same. So you're just renewing what you've already got. The new certificate is valid for 2 years. The renewal certificate is valid for 4 years. So if you're new, we want to hear from you a little bit more often so you get a little bit more feedback as you're developing and growing into that certification. If you're up for renewal, it's basically just showing that you can meet the requirements, you're continuing to meet the requirements, and you kind of know what's going on. Then I mentioned we have those 3 levels, and we conceptualize these as the first level being the basic how-to. So you'll see in that level, the topics are going to be things like conducting a successful session, policies and procedures, FERPA, kind of those big overarching what is tutoring and how do you do it well. Level 2 is going to be advanced, and that is going to focus a lot more on the psychosocial and self-reflective components of tutoring. So the idea is that they know the how. Now let's focus on the why, or the decision making that goes into the how. So at that level, you're going to see a lot more specialized populations. So for example, one of the topics is working with special populations, where you might say, we want to dig more deeply into working with students with disabilities, or working with students from this particular background or ethnicity or socioeconomic class standing, that kind of thing. You'll also see at level 2 a lot more of the topics focus on thinking about tutoring as a decision maker rather than as a process follower. And then at level 3, this is going to focus more on the management and metacognition pieces. And so this is getting that tutor almost thinking about it as like getting them ready to professionalize their work as a tutor. So you'll see a lot more focus on leadership. There's supervision training at that level. There's like presentation design, conferences, that kind of thing, available at that level, in addition to some of the more advanced tutoring topics. So that's kind of the big picture view. There's no reason why you have to do all 3 levels. It just really depends on your specific program. So I know a lot of programs that get level 1 certified and stay there because maybe they have a lot of staff turnover, a lot of community colleges, for example. If your tutors don't stick with you for longer than a semester or 2, it can be really hard to get those more advanced trainings in. I know some folks, they do the basics, they get their basic certification, and then they go off and do their own thing for the rest of their training with their programs. That's fine too. So there's no real right way to do it. It just depends on your specific circumstances and what makes sense for your institution and your program. Some programs submit all 3 levels all at one time. So we never hear from them until they submit all 3 levels. Some will start at level 1, and then as they go through and they get more comfortable, they'll add levels over time. And some folks will add a level and then they'll decide, you know what, we only had 1 tutor that really got to that level. We don't want to keep this level. We're not going to renew it when we renew the other 2. So really, there's a lot of flexibility there. They are sequential, however, so you cannot start at level 3. You have to start at level 1 and work up. And again, because it's about developing the tutor, I think that makes sense. All right. Pausing for any questions at this point before we talk about the criteria. The hardest thing in the whole world is just waiting. All right. I also have to say thank you, Lauren, for having your camera on because it gives me something to look at. All right. Now, 4 criteria. And again, we have this on a handout. Please don't feel like you have to race to write down all of these things. But these are the 4 criteria for certification. The first is your selection of the tutors that are going to go through your training program. The very, very basics, you have to interview your tutor candidates. With that interview, you should be talking about the essential role or function of a tutor. So what is the expectation of the job? We expect you to be collecting some kind of recommendation from a knowledgeable other for that candidate. That recommendation could be from a faculty member. It could be from an expert in the field. It could be if, I'm going to give a great example, if you run a writing center and you're an English faculty member, you could recommend someone because you are a knowledgeable other in writing. So the recommendation, the idea here is that you have somebody who has that content expertise who can say, yes, this particular student or candidate can talk about the content from this area in a way that makes sense. So they can communicate in the language of instruction around this content area with competence. In addition to that, we also want you to either get an A or a B grade documentation. So that could be a transcript, for example, or justified equivalent experience. So an experience that that student has had that would be equivalent to an A or a B in that content area. So for example, if I've been taking graduate level math classes at my institution, I might be a great candidate to do lower level mathematics tutoring. So maybe I didn't take the class at your institution or didn't take that specific class, but I've taken upper level classes in that and done really, really well. And combined with that recommendation from somebody who knows the content, you might feel comfortable having that person on your staff for that class. Another example we often get for justified equivalent experience is a native speaker tutoring in their language, their native language. So you might say, I had them talk to a faculty member for that recommendation, so we know that they can talk about the course content, and I'm using their native language experience as justified equivalent to a grade of A or B. One question we often get about selection is it required that you get a recommendation for every content area? And yeah, that is what we're looking for here. So if you have somebody who's tutoring for you in biology and chemistry, we want to have a recommendation from somebody who is an expert in biology, someone who is an expert in chemistry. You don't have to do it by class, but we do want to have it by subject. Right, so that's selection. The other thing is if you have multiple levels, the selection criteria might change for you at each level. So at level 1, you're doing the interview, the recommendation, you're doing the A, B grade. At level 2, you don't have to re-interview them, but you might say, okay, I'm going to sit down and talk to them about what level 2 is going to entail. I'm going to talk to their other faculty to get a different recommendation. I'm going to make sure that I verify they finished level 1 before they finish level 2, that kind of thing. These are slightly out of order, so I'll talk about evaluation next, but I want you to know evaluation usually happens at the end or middle. So the evaluation process is, yes. Oh, somebody just unmuted accidentally, okay. So here, the evaluation, the goal here is that you are evaluating your tutor trainees based on what you are training them to do. This should be done on a schedule. So once every 6 weeks, once a semester, once a year, once a week. And that the person who's doing that evaluation is somebody who's knowledgeable in the training content. So they are knowledgeable about the expectations of the curriculum of the training program. And then those results of that evaluation are shared with the tutor in some way. There are multiple ways that you can evaluate your staff. The gold standard, of course, is actually just going and observing them in a tutoring session, seeing them do the work of tutoring, and then evaluating them based on that observation. If you're not able to do that, or if that just doesn't make sense for how your center works, there are other types of evaluation that you can do. I've seen some really awesome tutor evaluations that start with the tutor writing a self-reflection and then meeting with their supervisor or their trainer and talking about how that reflection connects to the training standards and what sorts of behaviors the student is using or the tutor is using from the training. So it doesn't have to be an observation, it just has to be an evaluation that links to those training standards. Now, I also will mention here, we do sometimes get questions about like, can I have my students evaluate my tutors? Great idea as an addition to this evaluation. So because your students are not knowledgeable about the training curriculum, that can't be your only type of evaluation. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, so now we're going to talk about the two big parts, which is why I put them at the bottom and they're not in the right order. All right, so training is probably the largest of the four components. This is the thing when you're doing your application, there's going to be 3 sections. 3 out of the 9 sections have to do with your training program and your training curriculum. So your training needs to compose of at least 10 hours of training per level. And 5 of those hours of training need to be trainer-led, interactive, and synchronous. Now, you can do your entire training program as trainer-led, interactive, and synchronous. So you could have a class, for example, that meets once a week. But at least 5 of those hours need to be at TIS. The other 5 could be other things, like doing a reading assignment, doing a self-reflection, going out and observing others, and taking notes and then doing a discussion. Could be watching videos or doing a module. But at least 5 hours need to be TIS. You need to be tracking attendance and then aggregating that attendance toward the requirements. So what we mean by tracking and aggregating, tracking is they were there at this training on this particular day or during this particular week. Aggregating is they've got all of the different topics that they're supposed to get and they've met for that requirement. So sometimes folks will give us an attendance sheet and we just don't see that bigger picture. So I always like to point out the 2 pieces. There are specific topics that you must cover, and then there are topics that we recommend that you cover, and we can go into details about that as we go through. And part of that training is going to include an assessment. Can I just get somebody to give me an example of a type of assessment you might use during training? I'll wait.
Hi,
Hi,
excuse
Mary.
me. I'm
Marie.
at, let me see if I can put my camera on. Sorry about that. I got a lot of webcams going on, so
You're
that's
fine.
why. I promise I'm here. Okay, there we go. Hi, I'm at Washington State working in athletics. So what we've done, so I kind of took over the tutoring program and have had to familiarize myself a lot with CRLA and what we're doing. But the assessment that that we're doing, we always do 8 hours of, so we always do tutor training the first week of school. We start tutoring week 3. And so we do 8 hours the first week of school, and then we kind of do 2 hours throughout the semester. And then at the end of the 8 hours, we actually do kind of like an exam almost on all of the things that we went over in the first 8 hours of that training. And so the tutors always get very, very freaked out about this exam, but honestly, if they've just listened and been active participants, it's really not that crazy. But so we basically just assess everything that we've gone over. So anything from the logistics of the policies that we expect from them to university things, FERPA, we have some learning style strategies. So really everything under the moon, but everything that is in training is
Yeah.
what we do.
Yeah, so you could have them take a test. That is a great type of assessment. We've got in the comments, somebody said that they do a quiz. So they do an online module and then they take a quiz. That's a great type of assessment. What I am doing right now is also a great type of assessment. So I used a word. We have to do some type of assessment. And then I asked my trainees, what is an example of an assessment? Okay. So when we talk about training assessment, it doesn't have to be a test, but it can be. It could be on a scale of 1 to 5, how comfortable are you with this material? How likely are you to use this material in your session? It could be a discussion. It could be something where you have them do a role play, and then you give them feedback on that role play. So the idea here is that you're getting a sense during training of how the trainees are doing in getting what you're putting down. So are they understanding and absorbing the content from training? So you've all given some really great examples. We will come back to this slide in 1 second. I want to talk a little bit about the topics. So we've broken the topics down into these 5 categories. So the basics category, this is where you're going to find things like policies and procedures, tutor do's and don'ts, conducting a successful session, that sort of thing. Communication is where you're going to find things like question asking techniques, using direct communication strategies, that kind of thing. Learning and studying. So this is not just do they know how to study, but this is do they know how to talk about studying with their students? Do they know how to use graphic organizers to help students to understand the material and then use those types of strategies in their learning? Ethics and equity is where you're going to find things, like I mentioned at level 2, there's a lot of topics around DEI. You'll also find things like FERPA is in here, avoiding sexual harassment is in here. I'm trying to think, I always blank on topics every time I'm supposed to be thinking about them. Using student data. So if you give your tutors access to some of the students' information about their programs or that kind of thing, how to use that in a way that's equitable or ethical. And then under electives, we have a bunch of different topics available. A lot of them are things like a topic based on institutional need or a topic from another level that you wanted to cover in that level, but you didn't. So you want to cover it in a new level. So there's a lot of flexibility with the electives category. And at each level, it will tell you how many of each topic you need to cover. And each topic needs to be covered for 30 minutes. So if we look at level 1, there are 4 topics that you have to choose at level 1 in the basics category. Each one of those needs to be covered for 30 minutes. So how many hours of training is that? Making you do math. 2. At level 1, there are 10 topics. If each one of those topics needs to be covered for half an hour, how many hours of training is that? 5.
5.
Yes. Okay, I know, I'm making you think, sorry. So this does not mean that you can do 5 hours, well, it could mean you do 5 hours of CRLA topics, and then you do 5 hours of whatever you want. Perfectly fine. But we also wanted to give flexibility to programs for you to decide like, hey, I've got this topic. I don't think I can cover it in 30 minutes. I want to cover this topic over the course of 2 hours. You have the flexibility to do that. So we're not locking you in to you must cover all 10 of these topics for 10 hours. So you can kind of flex and stretch the length of time to cover the topic in a way that makes sense for your institution. So I personally really like that flexibility because there are some topics that just, for me, they need a lot more work to really make the tutor understand and use the strategies or use the content. Whereas other things like policies and procedures, not saying they're not important, but they're a little bit less fun. And I can usually do them a little bit more quickly. For each one of the topics that you select, we have a published set of standards, outcomes, and assessments for you to use. And actually, let me go to this one, which is a little bit clearer. So for standards, this is the broad knowledge or skill that the tutor will be working on developing. So the tutor is, or the tutor can use this strategy or understand this rule. Outcomes are going to be the specific behaviors that you want used in tutoring that are going to show you that the standards are being met. So this is usually the tutor does or is able to. And then the assessment is what the tutor will be doing. So the specific activities that you will use to measure how effective your outcome is at getting to your tutoring goal. So if you say, for example, the tutor structures and delivers a tutorial session using an effective methodology. That's our standard. Why do you want your tutor to use a structure? Well, because we know that if tutors use structures in their sessions, then the student feels like the session is more conducive to their learning. The student then feels more confident about the content. They feel more confident, they do better in their grades. So the outcome is, are we seeing they're using the beginning, middle, and ending of the tutoring session elements. They're using a greeting. They're using a friendly demeanor. They're using a student-driven agenda. They're using active learning experiences. They're checking in with the student about their understanding. These are the things that are going to show us that they're using an effective methodology. And then when we do our assessment, we're going to say, okay, did our training do what it was meant to do? So are we seeing those learning moments happen in training or happen outside of training that show us that the tutor is understanding how to do this and what it means? Any questions about the standards, outcomes, and assessments? I usually have some. And I'll say big picture, the standards are set, the outcomes are flexible, and the assessments are kind of pick and choose. So the standard, they structure and deliver the tutorial session. That is the standard for conducting a successful session. The outcome, you can kind of flex it a little bit based on your specific experience, your specific cultural context, what your center and how it's structured and what it does. So if you need to tweak that a little bit, you can. And usually it will have in the outcome some kind of language that says like, based on something that was taught in training. And then the assessment, we usually give at least 5 examples. You don't have to use all 5. You don't have to use any of them, but you just have to use some type of assessment. So we give you options. All right. So let's go back to our criteria and talk about experience. That's the last part. So if we do the big picture thinking about the 4 criteria, selection is, are you choosing candidates that have the skill to do this well? Training is, are you developing those skills and strategies and showing them how to do this job well? Experiences, are they going out and practicing the skills that you taught them in training? So when we look at experience, the minimum requirement is 25 hours of direct tutoring experience per level. And that is something that you as the program manager is tracking and aggregating for each tutor. This is something that is not cumulative across levels. So if you have a tutor who has 100 hours of training in their first semester working for you, that doesn't mean they're done with their experience hours. Because at level 2, they're going to get new training content and they have to be able to practice that training content. So they need an additional 25 hours of practice with that training content. And that experience needs to be tutoring. So if you have your tutor sitting in a lab waiting for students to show up, they are waiting to tutor, not tutoring. If you have a tutor that's also working as a supplemental instruction leader, being an SI leader is not tutoring, and that's per UMKC standards. So if they're doing SI work, you can't count that as tutoring. But you could have drop-in hours count as tutoring. You could have open lab hours count as tutoring, as long as you can track how the tutor is working with students and for how long. So there are lots and lots of ways that people do that. This is where it gets a little bit like center specific because everyone does it a little differently. My institution, we use Track Cloud. So we just have our tutors say, yes, I met with this person, log out when they leave. That's how much time they spent with the student. Other programs use other systems. So it doesn't have to be anything in particular. It could be a piece of paper that the tutor fills out and then the student turns it in when they leave the lab. That's perfectly fine. But just some way of tracking that they're actually working with students. All right. And this slide just talks you through that again. The big thing is that it can be concurrent with training. So if you have I don't know how we structure our training is basically we have like an orientation that we do at the beginning of the semester that's a couple of hours, and then we do 1 hour a week for 5 or 6 weeks. So they do that orientation to get that basics, and then they start tutoring. Other programs, like Marie was saying earlier, they front load their training and they get all their tutors to do training at the beginning of the semester. And then they might do some kind of just-in-time check-ins throughout the semester just to say, hey, this is the point where studying is going to become a big importance to your students. So let's talk about those study strategies again. So you can do it either way. Both are fine. And then just making sure that this experience is like actually working with students, not just like waiting to work with students. And the other thing I'll point out is that it's the hours spent, not the number of students. So if they're working with a group of 3 students for an hour, that's 1 hour. So you might talk about contact hours with your administration and when you're writing your reports, but when we're talking about experience hours, it's hours spent, not contact hours. All right, so where are we now? We are done with time. Those are the 4 criteria. I do want to show you a couple of things. I have this here in the slide deck. Just if you're thinking about how do I do all 3 levels at once, or in what different ways can I do this? There are so many different ways that you can do this. So don't feel like you have to do all 3 levels running concurrently, where you have your level 1 meeting on Mondays, your level 2 meeting on Tuesdays, your level 3 meeting on Wednesdays. You can stagger it. You can do offset weeks. You can do front loaded, like Marie was saying. There's lots of ways to do it. And then I also want to make sure that I tell you if there's a problem. So if we're reviewing your application materials and there's something that's not quite right or that we don't understand, there is a process for that. So we don't just immediately reject your application. We're not looking for perfect applicants. We're looking for good programs. So if we notice that there's something that's a little bit odd, we will reach out and we'll say, hey, it looks like this documentation doesn't add up right. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you collect this? And then we have up to 60 days to help you work through whatever that is. So don't let the application scare you. There's a process for that. The number one recommendation that I can make when you're doing your application materials is just making sure that you're thinking about it from an outsider's perspective. So like when I'm looking at Lauren's application, I am not Lauren. So my experiences with Lauren's program are going to be very limited. So just thinking outside the box, maybe having somebody from another department or another office just look through your statements just to make sure that things make sense, because there's as many ways to run a learning center as there are learning centers. So that's one of the big recommendations I can make. The other big recommendation I would make is if you start to panic, stop and email us. There is literally, like, I'm not going to pre-review your application, but if you're like, oh my God, it says that I have to do 50 hours of training. How do I do 50 hours? Like, don't panic, ask the question and get the answer. And this is the email address that I recommend emailing. It's our main certifications email address, certification@crla.net. So if something seems like it's unduly stressful, or that you're just doing something to do it and it doesn't seem to make sense, ask us before you spend 17 hours on it. And we will help you figure out how to do it. So I know I've had some folks that are like, oh my God, I only have to do my annotated bibliography for my sample topics. Oh, that's so much easier. Like, what have I been stressing out about? So don't be afraid to ask questions. And then I also want to make sure that I point out, here, let me get to it, this Learn Assist listserv. So the Learn Assist listserv is out of the University of Florida, and it is amazing. It has several thousand Learning Center professionals on it. And if you ask a question like, hey, I'm trying to revise this topic and I'm struggling with finding an activity, like you'll have like 15 people respond to you and say, here's something that I do. So I always like to point people toward that if you're looking for that community listserv. is a great way to do that. And then I also, again, I'll put this is the link to the slide deck. This slide is the last slide. There's a one pager about the requirements. There's a link to the standards and outcomes publication. You can preview all of the application questions without needing to start the application. So if you're somebody that like you want to do some pre-work before you even think about looking at the application, you can do that. I also love to point people to the standards and outcomes publication Appendix I, which is a checklist. It's actually the checklist that I used to certify my own program. And then I was like, oh gosh, let's put this in here for folks, because if it helped me, I'm sure it will help others. All right, so whew, that was a lot of content. Thank you for putting up with me. I want to make sure that we have time for maybe one or two questions. And I know Caitlin said she has an evaluation she's going to share. So if you have questions, now's the time. Caitlin, you want to take over my thing? And
Yeah, definitely. I will just share my screen with a QR code that is just information, or it's an evaluation form for this session. You don't have to do it now. But if you could do it at some point by the end of the day, that would be appreciated. It's just data that we collect for the program and thinking about planning for next year.
mhm. Any questions for me? Informative. I love to hear that. Thank you so much. I know we're doing a lot. There's a lot of content to cover. We also, I guess I'll plug, we also have a summer institute that CRLA does about training program design. This year it's in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm one of the faculty for that. Cheryl, who is supposed to do this session, she's also one of the co-faculty. So if you have a little bit of professional development funds and you want to do an institute, it's 3 days where we basically just do nothing but training design and program design. And it's very energizing. And there are other things you can do too, but so that's something you're looking for. You can find out more on our website. Let me see if my QR scanner works. Yeah, it does. All right. Well, I hope y'all enjoy the rest of this support summit. I know I look forward to this every year. I think I've been coming since the pandemic, since 2020. Yeah. So this is one of my favorite virtual conferences. So Caitlin, you can take that to the bank.
Well, we appreciate it, and we appreciate all the information that you shared. And we hope everybody has an awesome rest of the day. Enjoy the rest of your sessions. And feel free to reach out with any questions.
Yeah, and I'll stick around too if you want to message me.
Perfect. Awesome. Alrighty. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. Thank you for the hand clap, Michael.
Hi, Sean. I have a question. So
Yeah.
I currently serve as a learning specialist and a tutor coordinator. So tutor coordinating isn't my full-time role, but what is your advice to someone who this may not be a full-time role, but you still want to provide this training and provide like a more solid program?
Yeah. I would say think about how you can use your strengths. So, you don't have to be the one that delivers all of your training. So for example, you might say, I'm going to do the basics, or I'm going to have them go and do this online module. There's puretutortraining.com. It's like a free online training module. I'm going to have them do this module, and then we're going to get together and do some discussion, and then we're going to do, so think about what you can give.
Okay.
That's why we only require 5 hours of that, like trainer led. So you can use that other time to have a guest facilitator come in, or to have them watch a video or read an article, and do a discussion post. So, don't think about it as like, I have to design a course. Think about it as like, what am I able to do? What is something that I can commit to meet those 5 hours? And then how do I fill in the gaps with resources?
Okay. Awesome. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Mhm.
I was like, I do not have time in my day to day to
Yeah,
fit all of this
Yeah.
in, especially with the chaos that is the first week of school. So no, I appreciate that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
yeah, no problem. Yeah, and I hear you. Like I did that kind of dual role stuff for a long time, and it is hard.
Yeah. We're making it though. We're making it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So I'm just gonna like bop along to the soundtrack I have playing over top of you all.